Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to give it a second to let the people come into the room, and then we will begin. All right, we'll allow the people to come into the room, but good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this special webinar we're having. Custom computer specialists, how to prepare for and recover from a cyber attack, which is a very tuned subject right now. I'm Anthony Forgione. I'm the Director of Business Development for the HIA-LI, and I want to welcome you. Before we begin, I do want to thank our board of directors. Some who are on this call today. Our board has been very supportive of the HIA-LI throughout, and have really stepped up when we went through going through our COVID period. So we want to thank each and every one of them for all their support for helping the HIA-LI and being focused on growing the economy on Long Island. I also want to thank our sponsors today, Custom Computer Specialists, and also Ruskin Moscow. Both, we appreciate all your support, and with your support like this allows us to put together programs like this. So I do want to introduce, I forgot our upcoming events. So on November 19th, we do have our 11th annual Women Leading the Way. The tickets are still available. It is going to be held in person at the LGBT Network right here in Hauppauge. For those who cannot make it, there is also the option to sign up virtually. I also want to mention that on January 21st is our annual meeting and legislative breakfast, which is always a wonderful program where we hear about updates on the HIA-LI, but we also hear from various dignitaries and legislators on Long Island on their view for the upcoming year of 2022. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Dennis O'Connell. Dennis is a Director of Healthcare Solutions at Custom Computer Specialists. He has over 30 years of experience in the field of technology with a concentration on developing data security solutions. Dennis has frequently been featured as a guest speaker and panelist at healthcare conferences, seminars, and webinars on topics such as cybersecurity, disaster recovery, and cloud migration. In addition, Mr. O'Connell has authored numerous articles on cybersecurity and best practices. So I will turn it over to Dennis, but before I turn it over to Dennis, if anyone has any questions, please enter it into the Q&A field and we will answer your questions. So Dennis, take it away.
Sure, thank you very much, Anthony. Hey, can we see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Good, super. Great, again, thank you very much for having us today. Dennis O'Connell with Custom Computer Specialists. A little background on Custom Computer. We've been an HIA member for, gosh, as long as I can remember. It's a great organization, really appreciate the opportunity to network with the members on this very important topic here. A little background on Custom Computer. We're a 450-person IT support organization, ranging from outsourcing IT to cybersecurity. And we're going to dig into cybersecurity. A little bit more on my background. I've been heavily concentrated in cyber for the last 15 years, spending time with McAfee Intel, working with the largest healthcare systems in the Northeast, to working with a boutique security company in New York City, working with some of the largest organizations in the world, and back here at Custom Computer Specialist, helping to evolve and develop a terrific security practice. With me, I've got Andrew Garbarino, someone that we partner with quite often on cyber events, and I'll turn it over to Andrew. You can do a little introduction.
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I am Andrew Garbarino. I am not the Congressman Andrew Garbarino, who I'm sure some of you know. That being said, I'm a lawyer at Ruskin Moscow, where I do a lot of crisis work, white collar defense, regulatory defense, cybersecurity breaches. The firm's been around for a little over 50 years, close to 55 years, actually. Full service business law firm on Long Island. We're very happy to be associated with the HIA, and I'm especially happy to be associated with Dennis and the folks at Custom today. Again, we do work together, and it's never not been a good experience working with Custom. As far as the cybersecurity work, I'm excited for today's program. It's constantly an interesting subject. In the years that we started actively doing cybersecurity work at the firm, our cybersecurity practice group has consistently been, if not the fastest growing, among the fastest growing practice groups at Ruskin Moskowitz Faltishek. I traditionally start programs like this by saying that, Dennis and I aren't trying to scare anyone, but, as I think about it, I guess we sort of are, because cyber attacks are only getting more pervasive, and the results of cyber attacks are only getting, all the more devastating as the years go on. I'll also note that this is a bit intimidating for us. We could probably do an entire weekend seminar on cybersecurity. So doing this in the next 60 to 90 minutes is an intimidating task, but we'll go for it.
And back to the topic at hand here. I guess when Andrew and I have done these things in the past, we spent a lot of time on prevention. And I think we've kind of changed the agenda here a little bit, because prevention just doesn't work as well as everyone would like these days. So where we've shifted our attention is helping organizations prepare to recover, because it's inevitable. Whether it's a small attack or a large attack, the quicker you recover, the better your business is going to be going forward. The bad guys are pretty good at this. So we're going to take that approach to the session today. And let me jump to the next screen. You want to start us off?
Sure. So this is by no means an exhaustive set of examples of the cyber pandemic that we're embroiled in right now. If those of you who've been paying attention, Amazon paid close to $1 billion to European regulators, 886 million to European regulators related to a breach that they suffered. Anthem, the insurance company that I imagine some of you are associated with, has had multiple 8-figure payouts to regulators. Regulators take breaches very seriously, and one of the worst things about the nature of cyber attacks is this bizarre nature of holding, a company that would otherwise be, and well, I shouldn't say otherwise be, is actually the victim of a crime. A cyber attack is criminal in nature, but the victim, the organizational victim, whether it's SolarWinds or Robinhood or any of the stories you read in the news, are held financially accountable by regulators. It's a very unusual aspect of the laws that exists right now. And so suffering a cyber breach, in addition to all of the disruption and everything else that it causes, there can also be regulatory and financial impacts as far as the government is concerned.
Yeah, and we've put a couple of these up here because the game is changing a little bit, in my opinion. If you think of the Colonial Pipeline breach and ransomware attack, where they shut down the pipeline, gas prices went up. There were gas shortages. Same thing with JBS, which is the meat packing company. Right, the flow of beef slowed down. Prices went up. Organizations that focused on pork, their stock went up. Robinhood, all of the speculative passwords that are out there of the users, being breached. What I see here is an opportunity for the hackers to not only go after the ransomware, but also able to be a little more speculative in the market. If you think about pork being shorted and companies selling pork and their stock going up, well, if you're making that attack and you place a little bit of crypto on those companies, or buy some stock, it's a way of making more money. It's kind of an interesting tactic that they're starting to use now. On the other side here are I'm seeing a huge uptick in organizations taking a look at third-party risk. And third parties are organizations that you're doing business with that may have access to your systems and or information. Blackbaud was one earlier in the year. They're a fundraising application. A lot of large health systems use the application and load their donor database in there and manage it. They were hacked. When they first released the information that they were hacked, they said no information was stolen. However, a month or so later, they came out and said, yeah, this information related to these 20 plus companies was liberated. One of those companies was a large hospital that took their entire patient record system and loaded it into Blackbaud. That caused them to have to do a full-blown breach report, funding. It cost them more than $1 million. And one of the things that came out of it when they took a look at their limitation of liability in their contracts, that liability with Blackbaud was limited to the amount of money they would spend with them, all right, which didn't cover a fraction of their costs and pain and suffering. So one of the things you want to kind of take away from this is you want to take a look at your contracts, understand the risk that you've got, and potentially have them rewritten so that they are just as, co-liable and can help fund these things. SolarWinds and VCPI, SolarWinds was a huge one. It impacted organizations all over the world. This is an IT application that organizations use to help manage their system. SolarWinds was compromised, and as such, these IT systems were compromised as well. Huge, going after third parties. VCPI, something, lesson learned here, VCPI is a hosted nursing home electronic medical record system. They had over 110 nursing homes hosted, running IT for them. They got hacked ransomware. They had $10 million in coverage. Ransomware guys probably knew it and wanted 14 million. They went Chapter 11, shut down. 110 nursing homes had to go out and rebuild their EMRs from the ground up because they may or may not had them backed up. So one of the things you want to do is understand the risk of the organizations you're working with and put in some compensating controls, whether it is a backup of that data in the cloud, or what are they doing to protect themselves, or how, what happens if they go down. So you need to kind of understand these problems that your organization may come across in order to, better prepare yourselves for the future.
And just to follow along on one of the points that Dennis made, the notion of cyber attacks to manipulate the market is huge right now. The SEC has a significant initiative underway, and multiple other government agencies, whether it's the Department of Justice, individual states, have resources devoted to addressing these sorts of issues. And it's never business friendly. It's never friendly towards the business that gets attacked. And it's just something else to bear in mind.
So I've got the, a slide here from the Internet Complaint Center, the FBI. They've been tracking the number of attacks, the types of attacks. It's an interesting site to go visit. Kind of what we're seeing here, and obviously it's growing. Everyone knows it's growing, it's inevitable. Email is the most common entry point for getting into an organization, whether they're going after an executive and trying to move funds around. Text messages is a very popular way of getting in now too, getting passwords and whatnot that you might have stored on your phones. Farming fake websites, typically the result of a phishing attack. And then phishing, phone calls and messages. The longer you stay on with it, they're trying to get information out of you. They're targeted and more sophisticated, and they're more costly. I mentioned earlier that I worked at McAfee for a few years, and it was interesting. The evolution of the attacks went from when they would start an attack, they would build some sort of way to compromise systems and launch it out at the world, basically, and see what they could compromise and what they could, basically steal and do whatever they want to do. And this was kind of year one at McAfee. By year 4 at McAfee, we found that organizations were being targeted with a particular attack between 4 and 8 companies. They were very focused. They were very focused on industries. So they would write an attack specifically for a large hospital system, and they would and then they would learn from that attack, and they'd relaunch it in another health system. So it was much more focused, and these guys are smart. They're figuring out how to monetize what they're doing. It's not the days of the kid hackers are behind us.
And I don't want to minimize the social engineering aspect of these sorts of attacks. And, you know, the vishing or the voice phishing, it kind of sounds nonsensical. But as Dennis said, these folks are getting way more sophisticated lately. We have a client who's a physician, for example, and got a phone call. And I'm guessing that some of you have received a similar phone call. You know, my mother gets them all the time where, you know, somebody with an accent is calling and claiming that her DNA was found at the Texas-Mexico border in connection with some sort of murder investigation, and they need confirmatory information. And it sounds a little ridiculous. Our doctor client received a call from somebody claiming that a box full of opioids was intercepted on the Texas-Mexico border associated with her name. And this particular doctor was involved in an investigation because one of her patients overdosed on an opioid prescription that she prescribed. And this was a primed person who was ready to start giving whatever information this fake FBI agent who called was asking for. They knew that this person was a physician. They had certain information, where her office was, what her home address was, what her professional license number was. So that's a sophisticated voice phishing attack. Dennis and I, a few years ago, worked on a case where, now it wasn't just voice phishing, but we had a mutual client who through an email and then other communications convinced the CFO of a company to wire $100,000 to a particular bank account while the CEO was out traveling. Somebody impersonating the CEO was claiming that they needed this money to open up a new storefront somewhere. And the client suffered a loss to the tune of $800,000 at the end of the day. These attacks can be very sophisticated. You never know what information is out there that somebody can use to sort of put together that background information that's going to be necessary to effectuate one of those attacks. And in addition, you know, along the lines of what Dennis was saying earlier about vendors and things like that, we have a client whose cloud server was breached. There's a large healthcare organization. Their cloud host suffered a breach, and it's caused all sorts of problems because this client was individually breached within the same year. And the first instance is bad enough. The second one is all the more devastating. So just because you've been breached, and I imagine that some of you have had incidents, it's no guarantee that you're not going to be breached again or that you're not going to be attacked again. And most of these problems can be traced back to, you know, a bad click on a single link, a bad response to a single email, or engaging somebody on the phone improperly. So, I'm sorry, Dennis, go ahead. Well, I was, you know, just to start with, you know, these attacks are a business model, and, you know, there are all sorts of threat actors out there. There are nation hackers, China, Russia, North Korea. There are businesses that are out there, maybe competitors trying to steal your IP. You know, China's research and development, a lot of that is based on their own hacking. A lot of their military developments are based on plans that we know they obtained through illicit means by way of cyber attacks. As to individual actors, you know, or you know, the pure criminal element, this is a business model. And one of the things that I think we all have to come to terms with, and this isn't just for the folks on this conference, is, you know, whether to pay a ransom, you know, when suffering a cyber attack, has sort of been a hot question for a couple of decades now. And the standard answer has evolved from no, you shouldn't be paying a ransom to if you need the data, pay the ransom. And now that thought is kind of, well, what happens when you pay a ransom? This is a business. This is a criminal enterprise. And don't think that these folks aren't pumping that money back into their own criminal enterprises infrastructure. They're buying better hardware. They're training themselves on better ways to do things. And there's a lot of money that these folks are making. As far as nation actors, China, Russia, if they steal your IP as a business, what are you going to be able to do about it? You have no ability to go after and prevent China from using your research and your intellectual property. If it's a competitor, you might be able to sue them. But how are you going to handle the criminal actors and the nation actors that might be out there? They're all professional, they're all organized, and they run things like it's a business.
Yeah, I think the other part of the business worth mentioning is these guys that develop these attacks, they resell them on the dark web to other organizations that might not be as sophisticated. And so again, it's another enterprise. So the barrier to entry to actually become effective at breaching a network is very, very low right now. And as such, most organizations can't put in enough controls to stop it. I think the one thing that we want to kind of get out of this is what's in a reasonable amount of controls. And by controls, I mean your firewalls, your antivirus, and the tools that you put in to protect yourselves. What's an appropriate amount? Because you can't invest as much as a large organization or a government can to protect themselves. So you want to right size it. And again, this is why I think it's important to talk about what happens if you get compromised, how quickly can you recover, and what steps can you take ahead of time to shorten that recovery period and minimize your overall exposure.
So
that's it. An anatomy of attack to kind of give you all a feel of how this works. An initial attack, takes weeks, and in the first weeks, what they're typically doing, they're not shutting you down. They'll compromise you. They'll do some reconnaissance. By reconnaissance, they'll try and see what kind of passwords they can get. They'll try and take a look for weaknesses inside your network. By weaknesses, is your IT guy using his own password for the server administration password? So that gives them the keys to the entire kingdom. So they're trying to find a foothold and get privilege escalation. And then over months, they're gaining control. They're going to build an attack, and then they're going to attack and cover. Give you an example of there was one large breach. It was probably about 1,800 computers that we helped on. After it was all said and done, and kind of took a look at what happened, there were 3 different threat actors in there at various stages of compromising their network. The one that actually locked them down and put the ransomware and everything kind of shut down the other threat actors, and we were able to put controls in place to prevent them from gaining a foothold. But the idea of you getting compromised, so these guys had an open server. They got in there, they escalated, and it was interesting to see 3 different actors in there at the same time, getting ready to launch different attacks. Andrew?
And well, one thing I wanted to ask you about, Dennis, because I think it's instructive here. You had an interesting situation fairly recently that involved backups, and there are a lot of folks that think that a backup is sort of a shield that makes a company bulletproof when it comes to a cyber attack. And I know you had a situation that involved somebody who spent a lot of time, was very patient as a breacher. And can you just give a little bit of color about that?
Yeah, sure. Same attack. So the company did the right thing. They had backups in place. They set up a standby data center in Minnesota so that, theoretically the systems went down in New York, they could flip over to Minnesota. The attackers were very thorough. They went in and wiped out the backups. So the idea of recovering the systems and getting their business up and running and not paying ransomware went right out the window. They shut down the operations in Minnesota as well. So, kind of a lesson learned from this and where we've gone with them since is we've helped them set up air-gapped backups. This is becoming almost a requirement in some industries. The idea of an air-gapped backup could be something as simple as you identify your critical systems, you back them up to a hard drive, and you disconnect that hard drive from the network so that you have ability to go back a week or a month in time, depending on what your tolerance is for risk. So that's, very important. I think the other thing that I wanted to kind of point out here is, we talked about the organizations and the size of the organizations were large. All right, and we kind of do that because those are recognizable names that most organizations will get a feel for. 2 weeks ago, working with an organization, 25 user accounting firm. They were compromised through, and indeed like most organizations did, when COVID hit, they scrambled to enable their people to work from home. And what the result of that scrambling was is they set up remote access, and they set it up in a manner to get people online and quickly. Challenge was they didn't go back after things calmed down and figure out how to tighten these things up. The bad guys run a simple sweep out there of organizations. They say that you're running RDS. They'll run some tools against the RDS to see if there's a back door, and then they'll slip inside the back door and potentially compromise the network. All right, so they're in there, they're kind of working around the network. Thankfully, this organization, at a recommendation, put in some advanced malware protection. All right, so when the bad guys tried to launch the malware attack against them, that attack was thwarted. All right, and it was thwarted again. They tried different tools. They tried a half a dozen different tools to try and get them going. Finally said, screw it, we're going to send them an email, try and hold them for ransom, tell them we stole a bunch of data and you better pay us or we're going to launch this data and put all your client information out there. So still ongoing, but that kind of gives you a feel for they were in there for probably a week or so. Things were compensating controls was shutting them down. They got frustrated, they couldn't mount the full attack, so they went for another tactic to try and squeeze these guys, get cover money for their efforts.
And it's important, based on some recent figures, the fastest growing targets for cyber attackers are businesses that have lots of clients, not necessarily customers, but clients. Think law firms, insurance firms, accounting firms. That's based on data that was released by the Department of Health and Human Services about a month ago. So that's the sort of data that appears to be especially valuable to some of these hackers because it may create access to a number of other targets for them. And just, I can't harp enough, if you take anything away from this talk today, the human resources aspect of cybersecurity is really critical. Guarding passwords, changing passwords, monitoring passwords, asking somebody who might have a job in two different places a question as simple as, do you use a different password at both of your jobs? Those are the sorts of things that become very important as an organization to account for. That and training, which I think we'll get to in a little bit.
I think we painted a pretty bleak picture. And I think we'll kind of shift our focus here is what can we do to kind of get out in front of this and help your organization plan for potentially recover quickly.
Yeah, you need to have controls and you need to have a plan. And I know we're not really talking much prevention, but just to touch on a few things, just, simple things like physical security and locked doors. I have a friend who will tell you that, if he has, 15 seconds alone with any sort of workstation, he can get into it. It's that quick. It can happen that quickly. So locked doors, cameras, hardware, the software cocktail, monitoring, and that's something that we'll talk about as the breach is going on, and keeping abreast of what's going on with other companies like yours or just other companies. Monitoring information that's released by the FBI or other regulators about data breaches that have occurred. And making sure that you have a plan. When I say have a plan that you're going to work. If you're not going to work that plan, I would rather you not have it, because it'll ultimately be used against you. It's great if you have this great set of protocols, but if you're breached and a regulator, whether it's the Attorney General or somebody else, asks you if you did all the steps that are in your plan, and the answer is no, that becomes a really bad thing. So have a plan, make sure you work your plan, because that's going to be a question if and when you are breached. And I think one of the things that you can do is consider why you're holding certain data, because I think that's coming. It's not really out there right now, sort of defining, other than in very specific instances, sort of grading the type of data that you might be holding. But if you're a business and you're asking your customers for social security numbers, consider if you really need them. All right. Sometimes some companies do. Accounting firms most certainly do. Other businesses might have a need for it. But if it's just a retail business, you don't need stuff like that. You don't need to have credit card numbers on file necessarily. So just that's sort of an internal exercise that I think is healthy for companies to do, because that's coming sometime in the next 5 to 10 years. The notion of essential data is going to become a very big issue with legislators and folks that write up the regulations. And also consider who needs certain data. Your receptionist probably doesn't need access to your online banking information. So consider who has access to what. It's something that not enough companies do. And work those plans, consider those, hire the right consultant to help you if you're not prepared to do it internally.
Yeah, and you brought up an interesting topic about physical security. I think we're so focused on the cyber here. Work with an organization, a new security guy comes in, takes a look at controls, went to their data center and exterior door to get into the data center, took a credit card out of his wallet, swiped it down, opened the door, went inside, and was able to get full access to the entire system. So don't overlook the physical security. Prior to the pandemic, I think now we kind of examine everyone that's coming in the door, maybe take their temperature and everything else. But another organization that I worked a breach with, a fake UPS guy came into the building, plugged something into the wall, an open jack, and was able to get access to the network. So sometimes it's just being aware of some things that can happen that you can kind of put preventative controls in place.
And that physical security isn't limited to your own office. You should go at least once a year. If you have a cloud host, visit them once a year. Check their office out, make sure that it's clean, make sure that you're comfortable with the way things look, and ask questions about their security. Because if your cloud host gets hacked, you've been hacked. And again, I've dealt with it. It's a disaster.
So what steps can we take to kind of minimize your risk? And the first step that I see most organizations don't do is conduct a risk assessment. And a risk assessment is really pretty simple. It's understanding where your threats are coming from and putting controls in place and or policies or procedures to help prevent things from happening. So, and prioritizing things is almost as important. And we'll get into it a little bit deeper later, but if your systems were compromised, and let's say it's only a couple of computers, but if those computers are managing payroll, that's a pretty big deal if people can't get paid. You want to get in, understand the risk of your systems and how that's going to impact your business. But where you typically start is your staff. So many breaches are a result of staff either being malcontent or leaving to go somewhere else and stealing something, or just doing something to promote business, but not realizing that it's risky. I'll give you an example of that. Somebody wanted to enable their remote users to access a system. So So they took a server and put it out into the outside of the firewall and gave people access to it. Problem is that server held a whole bunch of private information ready for a breach. But what they were trying to do was enable business, but didn't do it in a secure manner. So you want to examine things there and understand it. We talked a fair amount about third party and business associates. They open up your attack surface profile, whether it be from backdoors into your organization or from them being breached and impacting how you do business. After you kind of walk through those, you want to take a look at your technologies. The hardware that you're using. Is it really old? Has it been upgraded? Has it been patched? What's the likelihood of something failing and bringing down your operations? Your applications that you're using, whether they be on-premise and in the cloud. And this goes back to what Andrew was talking about, the theory of least access privilege. Do the right people have the access to the right information? How do you dial back that control? Are you holding too much data on the network? If you're going to, from an e-discovery perspective, how long should you be holding data? I've worked with organizations that say, we don't hold anything any more than 6 months. It's just gone. That's our policy, that's our procedure, unless it's tied to something that regulations mean you have to hold it longer. So you need to understand that, weigh your risks, because it can cause you a big pain later with litigation. Remote access, we talked about this a little bit earlier as an example. I talked about with that small accounting firm. Who has access? How are you locking down that access? And how do you know that it's them that's accessing the system? Similarly, are you only allowing access from a company asset? All right, it's one of the easiest way to control things is to lock it down and say, okay, only this computer, we have a mechanism for testing it and understanding it's coming to the network. Are you using multi-factor authentication when someone's not connected to the network? So it's challenge and response. Many people see that in the online banking. When you're accessing your account, it's going to give you a challenge and response that only you might know, or it's going to send a notification to your phone. So you want to, that's a big attack surface now, and it's gotten much larger, since COVID started. And it hasn't really shrunk all that much, but a lot of the weaknesses are out there. Understand the mobile, whether it be the vishing or the smishing, or, those are backdoors into your network too, because they're going to have applications that may be tied to systems. And kind of finally is and this is a big awakening out there with the idea of medical device of things or internet device of things. These are your smart thermostats, the cameras that are now on your network as opposed to being a separate network. A good example of one of these, Mohegan Sun had a fish tank camera. It's funny because we have one in our office too. We're all going to come down and see it anytime. But someone hacked the fish tank camera, used that to get into their high roller database and liberated that database. So understanding the risks of the now interconnected world, there are so many things that can open up an organization. So, and then the most important thing here is when you get done with this, you can identify all your inventory. That's really kind of what we're talking about. There's an inventory of everything we have. You want to understand what's acceptable downtime and time to restore. And this is kind of the idea of business continuity. If you were to be compromised, how long would you be able to continue to do business without your systems? Because what happens is when you're breached and you get hit with an attack, you lose all control. All right. The insurance guys come in, the cyber insurance guys come in, they bring their forensics guys, they lock down the system. You want to get everything back up and running. All right, but they're saying, no, this can get worse. All right, so they lock everything down. Now what you wind up doing is getting new systems to put in parallel to it so that you can restore to. All right, what's the availability of computers and or servers? Well, right now, not very available. So you want to understand what you want to understand. You almost want to get down to department level, like I talked about with, payroll and or accounting or sales operations. You want to understand and prioritize those, and you want to do it before the breach, all right? Because what's going to happen is, when a breach is occurring, everyone's scrambling around trying to get all caught up and get things back working. But you want to know systematically. All right, we need to get this going first because this is going to impact our ability to continue to do business. Then we want to take care of, maybe it's payroll, maybe it's this, maybe it's that, but you want to prioritize the business units and how you bring them back on. You also want to identify how often is this assessment done. As a rule of thumb, whether it be annually and or every time a new system is introduced. All right, so whether it be a new application or a new process, you want to go through this again. So, and you want to add more color?
Yeah, just a few things. You know, the earlier you can identify the critical systems that you need to maintain, if you're shut down, whether it's an attack or anything else, the better it's going to be for you after the fact. So understanding the critical systems and then taking steps to ensure that those systems are maintained is very important. I do just want to say that a risk assessment is, you know, it's not a particularly onerous thing. Everybody who can do one should do one. It's important. If you're breached, you know, I'm going through it right now. A regulator will likely ask you when the last risk assessment your company performed was. And then the follow-up is going to be, and what did you change when you had that risk assessment done? So implementing changes based on that risk assessment is also critical. Otherwise, it's like it just didn't happen, or worse, you ignored an issue and that's going to be used against you, whether it's a regulator or because one of your customers or vendors or clients is suing you because their data was breached. So it's a critical step. I encourage all of you to go through with it.
So take preventative measures. You know, develop a security program. You know, don't wish for the best. You want to put something together. A framework, you know, such as NIST or HITRUST or PCI, if you're doing credit cards, is a very good starting point. NIST is a 160 plus questionnaire that allows you to kind of rank how you are set up from a security perspective. National standards, and it'll say, you know, something to the effect of your backup. All right, do you have a backup? Would be a 1. You know, are you testing your backup? Might be a 2. You know, have you tried to do a restore? Is a 3, and are you monitoring it? And you know, how is it documented and everything else? So it allows you to grade yourself on a scale of 1 to 5 to get maturity. And what that drives is, hopefully, you know, if I was a 3 but I want to be a 4, all right, you're gonna do something different, all right, to get you from a 3 to a 4, and you're gonna document it and you're gonna measure it. So it allows you to set a baseline for your organization for moving forward. I think that the next piece that's really critical is, and Andrew talked about this earlier, is educate your staff. Because in the end of the day, typically it's the person that's clicking on the email that could compromise your organization, and they might not realize it. It's the person that might transfer money to somebody and they don't realize it. So, and it happens more often than you think. So there are education programs where they do self-education and or contract with an organization that has security training and or testing available. But that's going to be your first line of defense is your people, and making sure that they are, you know, protecting your organization and protecting themselves, quite honestly. You know, it's interesting. I had a conversation with someone the other day. They work for Verizon. Verizon does not allow their employees to be posting anything about themselves on Facebook or social media other than LinkedIn. All right, because that's social engineering available and the ability to compromise your organization ultimately. Implement current technologies. You know, talked about endpoint detection and response. The days of a simple antivirus are gone. You want somebody to put in a better technology, whether it's AI driven or machine learning, or but you know, an extra set of eyes that's keeping an eye on it. It's not that expensive. And you know, like I used in that example of the accounting company, it saves their bacon. Encryption is important, and it's cheap. You can get a cloud-based encryption now for a couple bucks a user a year, and you can encrypt all devices, not just laptops, but you want to encrypt your laptops, you want to encrypt your mobile devices. Encrypting your servers is becoming more of a standard these days too. similar to firewalls. The days of putting a firewall and antivirus in are behind us. You want to go to the next-gen firewall. And what a next-gen firewall does, it's going to inspect web traffic. It's not just access control. It's going to inspect internal traffic. It's going to, an IPS is anti-malware for the wire. Web protection and email protection, also very important to have a robust strategy here. Email especially, it's the #1 attack vector. Multi-factor authentication, huge these days. Many cases, I've seen a lot of, and I do a fair amount of reviews of cyber insurance policies. It's a question on there. If you answer you're not using multi-factor authentication for remote access and or for protecting critical systems, cyber insurance guys are just not underwriting it. They're passing and they're moving on because they don't want to take on that risk. Monitoring, whether you build your own monitoring program or you subcontract to a company like myself or somebody else, that's kind of important too. Similarly, we talked about the backup air gap. There are automated systems that do it, but it could be as simple as a hard drive that's going to take a backup and bring it back to the president's home for safekeeping until you might need it. Andrew?
So yeah, developing and updating these measures is critical. The training, that HR aspect, I can't stress it enough. It's the most important thing. The training, the education. I can't tell you how many breaches we can trace back to just one poor choice that an employee, some of whom have been trained, may have made. And updating that set of protocols, whatever it may be, is also critical. If you don't update it, it's kind of like not having one. Defining what to do if something is happening. If somebody clicks on a link and that dreaded message comes up, and it, informing the user that their machine has been compromised and demanding a ransom, what do? They're not supposed to just start ripping wires out of the wall, but maybe they're trained on how to disconnect properly. Who that person is supposed to call, the chain of command, the chain of communication, those are essential. And understanding, making sure that the folks in that chain understand that they're in the chain and what their role is. And those people need to be trained. The solution can't be just calling, the kid in the mailroom who's going to Stony Brook and thinking about majoring in computer science. It's got to be somebody who knows what to do, even if that's just who to call. But there's got to be somebody, somebody's got to be the point person to at least get somebody else involved immediately. And do so in a way that maintains, what we call digital forensics. Again, working the plan is critical, because again, if you don't follow the plan, it turns into what I call the why questions when you're dealing with whether it's a regulator or a plaintiff's counsel who's now suing you. Why didn't this happen? Why didn't they follow these steps? Why didn't they implement this? Why didn't they follow the recommendations after their risk assessment? Those are bad questions to not have a good answer to. You always want to have a good answer to those why questions. Or did they do this? Did they do that? You want to be able to say that you did everything you could, everything that was recommended, and you might go under a degree of sympathy if you do, but not always.
Cyber insurance, the game has changed. It's gone from the Wild West where they're writing everybody left and right for pennies on the dollar, to this is really, the business has matured. Getting your cyber insurance renewed is an onerous process. The bar has been raised significantly. Technical requirements now, I've got, it's similar, just about, I could write the presentation to the cyber insurance. Are you using multi-factor authentication? Are you, passwords separated from administration to personal use? Are you air gapping? Are you putting in, X, Y, and Z controls? Are you doing assessments? Have you done a risk assessment? Have you done, are you following NIST? They really have gotten so granular with what they're looking at, and then they put it into a machine and they score you, and that's going to be the basis of your payment and or of your ability to be covered. So one of the things that you also want to take away from it as you review your cyber insurance, because now these guys are getting smarter. They're putting some exclusions in there. They're putting limits and sublimits for different types of attacks and breaches and what they will and won't cover. They're putting co-insurance in there, which is basically how much you're going to have to pay out of pocket in addition to what they're going to pay out of pocket, and exclusions. If the breach is the result of a laptop that was supposed to be encrypted, is not encrypted, and you can't prove that it was encrypted, that would be an exclusion, and they might not cover you. So you want to understand, it's almost like a risk assessment of the cyber policy that you're getting. Cheapest is not always going to be the best because it may cost you a bunch more in the long run if in fact you are breached and they decide not to cover you for specific things. I think give you an example. Andrew touched on this one where the retail company was liberated to the tune of roughly $800,000 in $100,000 increments, and we covered the first 100, right? Because that was the result of hey, this was not multiple breaches, it was one breach, and it was your fault for the rest of them. So, Andrew, anything on that?
Yeah, just as far as cyber insurance goes, be an active customer with your insurance company. I had a law firm client that was breached. They had very good malpractice insurance that provided some cyber insurance coverage, but they had to use the malpractice insurance nominated attorney on their policy, who did not have any cyber insurance experience. It just wasn't a thought out area when the insurance policy was purchased. And a lot of companies require, if you want a specific attorney to come in and handle a breach, or a specific tech advisor to handle a breach or anything like that, that you need to identify them before the incident occurs. So be an active customer. If there are folks you want to work with, if something happens, you want to have that conversation with your insurance company as soon as possible. In the case that I'm talking about, I actually got a call from what's a very good malpractice firm asking me what I would do for this particular client who suffered a breach. It got that ridiculous. So involve your critical advisors in the process. Maybe ask some questions. Have somebody review the policy. Most insurance companies will work with you on this. They'll happily work with you on this, in fact. But be an active customer. Don't just go. You're not going to go out and get a policy in a particular morning. Be an active customer. Ask questions. Make suggestions, and find out what you can do to best protect yourself.
Yeah, I think, Andrew, that's a great point. I think the other piece of that is the technology guys that may need to support you. When you have a breach, you kind of lose control. Unless you hammer things out ahead of time. Your insurance company is going to bring in their own forensics guys. They're going to bring in the lawyers on their side. They're going to bring in the negotiators to negotiate the amount of money that needs to be paid. And they're going to bring in their own IT guys, and you're going to kind of be stuck on the sideline a little bit, kind of scrambling, but understanding that and preparing for it ahead of time makes a big difference. That kind of leads into this a little bit, establish working relationships. So you've been breached, you're shut down, the insurance guys are going to come in, your legal guys are going to come in, your IT guys are going to try to do their best to say, okay, we've got a backup, we don't have a backup, we should be able to restore, we can't restore. So you're going to kind of assess the environment, kind of build a game plan for rebuilding the organization. One of the things that, as we work through, many of these, what we see quite often is you've got insurance, and insurance will pay for outside resources quite often. So what I've seen in a lot of breaches is the IT guys are going to work all night long to try and restore things, and they're going to get burnt out. What you may want to have them do is be the coaches, and run the game. All right, bring in extra help, and when I mean extra help from an IT staff, organizations like ourselves. So I worked on one breach where there were 7 different IT organizations in helping doing remediation because it was that big. All right, they had the forensics guys coming in from the insurance company. They had guys that would help get the network going and figure out how to route around the network. They had server guys coming in to help rebuild servers because of the compromised servers. They wanted to build a parallel environment. Now they had to go out and touch over 1,000 computers as quickly as possible to bring the business back up and running. Like I tell you, even with 450 people here in my company, I don't have a team of 50 people I could throw at to go out and touch all these computers. I could probably, in a moment's notice, spare 10. All right, but if you need 50, you need other organizations that are going to complement it, and you need your IT staff to manage that game plan. All right, how are you going to do it? Who's going to do what? Who's going to do where? Because they've got the passwords, they got all the information. If you have them do the work, all right, it's kind of counterproductive. You want them on the sidelines, pitching in when necessary, but really kind of managing everything that's going on. IT remediation, so servers, computers, so it's really kind of laying it all out there. It can be overwhelming depending on the size of the organization. And it's a good idea to have these relationships in place ahead of time. You may be getting help from a small IT company, but you may want to have somebody in the sidelines that you can call on in a pinch.
No, absolutely on all of that. And this, again, goes back to your education and your training so that everybody understands what their role is. If you've got the luxury of an internal IT staff, that's great. But everybody should know their role. It can't be one person's responsibility or one small set of folks' responsibility. It's just too much to ask. It can be overwhelming. So everybody needs to understand their role and what their place in it is. And having these folks in place, it's a very comprehensive list that we have up here. It's critical. The first call should be internal when there's an incident, because that's the boots on the ground, so to speak. But then there should be a plan to coordinate everything else, and it's contacting counsel to make sure that that you understand who needs to be notified, whether it's customers, whether it's the Attorney General's office, whether it's multiple Attorneys General offices. Those sorts of issues, and then coordinating that sort of continued care once there's been a cyber incident.
So this kind of leads directly into that. Incident response and planning, the questions you need to ask. The first question you almost need to ask in incident response, aside from deciding what an incident is, how will you know if something's going on? I kind of mentioned that the accounting company that had stuff going on their network and other breaches that potentially have weeks of planning and surveillance, and will you know as these things are going on? Do you have systems in place that will kind of alert you that something anomalous is going on, or is it when you get the ransomware on the screen? So the earlier you can move detection up, the better you can. Understanding what you should and shouldn't do. I think Andrew kind of talked about this. You don't necessarily want your guys doing forensics. The insurance company can take care of that. Is it actually a breach, or is it just a ransomware attack? They're different things, all right? And you might have to do different responses based upon those. Who do you call first? And it could be as obscure as your lead IT guy is on vacation and the systems go down, right? You want to have a contingency in place for that. Break the glass. How do I get access to the passwords? With COVID going on, had one organization with lead IT guy sick with COVID, secondary guy in the hospital for 5 weeks, right? If they had been compromised at that point in time, they would have been in a world of mess. Do you have a working backup? Can you restore it? How often do you test it? Do you test files? Do you test the server rebuild? Don't be surprised. Had a small hospital get breached, and they didn't have a backup of their email. Their last good backup was 4 years old, and because they never tested it. They didn't think that it was necessary, because the backup tape or whatever it was they were using, said everything was good. But when they went to restore it, it wasn't good. What notifications, and Andrew and team can more on that. But how do you prevent and minimize in the future? And this could be anything from a small phishing attack to a very large attack. We'll dig into that a little bit more shortly. So, Andrew?
Yeah, and you know, the one thing that I would sort of add just in what's happening when something is happening is you want to document things. Okay. So there should be sort of a running narrative of, especially immediately, because that can be critical, you know, what may be happening at any given moment. And in terms of who you call, well, that's, you know, and what to do and what you shouldn't do, those are all pieces of your plan. Those are all pieces of that protocol. And my view is if you've got folks who can address it immediately inside your organization, they get the first call because they're there. But then you need to simultaneously almost notify everybody else on your list. And it's got to be folks that are competent. So when it comes to who needs to be notified, the answer is depends. You know, it depends on what sort of data was compromised, whether there was data compromised. That creates certain obligations. If you're a healthcare organization, you've got special HIPAA concerns that you know sort of enhance who you need to contact. But just being a New York State business or having customers in New York State creates certain obligations under the law. And if you've got customers in other states, you may have obligations to report to regulators in those states. Those are all critical things. One thing I'll say about preventing and minimizing in the future, you know, I'm currently dealing with a client that's been breached a couple of times. And another one of the questions that the client is being asked is, well, what did you do after the first one? And it's a tough question. You want to have a good answer to that. So taking a step, learning from an attack if you've suffered one is very important also, because you may be attacked again, depending on what sort of business you're in, or, you know, just it can sort of be like lightning striking. You never know when it may happen. I will say, and I should have said earlier, that monitoring is a critical aspect. It can identify breaches, especially internal breaches. We had a very large healthcare client that prevented a breach from a rogue employee who was trying to download lots of information. They had a robust internal IT group that caught it and was able to prevent that from happening. So those sorts of things should go along with those internal protocols.
Yep, and to wrap it up, you want to plan, you want to document it, you want to test it. Like you should be testing your backup, you should test the plan. It's worth it to do a dry run and go through it, go through the steps. You're even making the calls, but do a bench test. All right, so that way you're prepared, and you know some things come up during it that will enlighten you. Say, hey, maybe we do this a little bit different. We can recover a little bit quicker. So from a planning perspective, dig into a little bit more. You want to define and categorize the incidents. And typically severity 1, 2, and 3 is typically how they're going to be categorized. And you want to develop playbooks. A playbooks could be, all right, what happens, from an incident, from an environmental. An environmental could be fire or a sprinkler or someone spilling something on top of a computer or a server or a switch or a router. You want to have a playbook for things like ransomware. You want to have a playbook for malicious insider. So there's a different response for every one of these. So it's worthwhile to have the conversation. And you may find that when you do the first one, the second one becomes the same thing, only slightly different. All right, and you outline it and you put it together. So after you get the first one done, it certainly becomes much easier to get the ensuing ones done.
And if you don't have the internal capability to do this in your organization, it's worth it discussing this with an expert, a technology expert. How to do these things, how to grade. These classifications can be meaningless to certain people who just don't have the sufficient background or just aren't attuned to these sorts of issues. So taking the time to actually develop, because it's important, and documenting procedures is really, really important. Simply identifying what you've got. I can't tell you how many times we know that there's been some sort of a breach, but the client will look at us and say, well, I don't really know what they took. I don't really know what we were holding. That's a bad position to be in. So that understanding can really be critical to what the plan is going to be. Understanding what you have, where it's located, whether you can recover it, and whether somebody got away with it. And as Dennis mentioned earlier, what's coined or what's described in the industry as surge support, right? If your normal consultants aren't equipped to handle a particular issue, make sure you know and talk with your primary vendor about who else might be worth getting involved or who else might be worth contacting if there's an issue. Have that plan in place if you can before something happens.
And to give you a little example for scheduling exercises, a severity 3, minor with low impact. So that might be a ransomware attack affecting non-critical computers. Ransomware attacks have been going on for years. I've got one large healthcare system in New York City that was probably getting close to 20 ransomware computers a day. So they got to the point where, all right, so we don't store data on the computers, right? We store them on a server where they're locked down and they have better controls because those were not getting ransomware. We have images for the computers. So instead of paying the ransomware, they just blow up the computer and rebuild it. A minor impact, a phishing attempt on, a regular employee would be kind of small. A phishing attempt on the CEO might be a little bit bigger. And they're happening daily. But what do you do? Who do you notify? How do you put blocks in place? A department system failure. All right, if accounting goes down, what do you do? What's plan B? If sales ops goes down, what's plan B? A backup failure. All right, your staff, whether it be internal or external, should be monitoring your backup on a daily basis. Did the backup work? Did everything reasonably expected get backed up? Was there, something that didn't function properly? So, daily you want to take a look at that and you want to theoretically get some sort of report on the health of your backup over time. Because if you're not reporting on it in some manner or form, you're just trusting it and people get lazy and they don't do it. So you really want to schedule an exercise, and these would be the low impact. These are, and you want to define what the notifications are going to be. All right, if something like this happens, are you notifying the president or the CEO? Probably not. It's just normal day-to-day IT operations. But you want to define that and do an exercise. What do you do in these cases? And these are just a couple of examples of this type of minor with low impact or severity 3. We'll go with severity 2, and this would be a major one with significant impact. A third-party breach. All right, so this is one of our providers. They were breached. You want to understand what the impact is going to be to the organization. Email goes down. That's a pretty major impact for any organization. Phone system failure, and you say, how is this going to happen? Well, most phone systems now are on the same network as everything else. I've been in organizations where the email was running slow, so the guy turned the antivirus off. All right, that system got compromised, and then it kind of escalated throughout the organization, and their entire phone system was down for 6,000 users. So they're all impacted by each other now. So you want to understand the system. An executive phishing success. Andrew and I talked about this a bit already in an organization. What do you do? How do you do it? Who do you notify? System-wide ransomware with a full working backup. Yeah, inconvenient as all heck, but if you can rebuild it, you may not be paying the ransomware. So what do you do in that case? Making sure you've got a good backup is really kind of key. And I'll just jump to the last one here. We'll kind of wrap this up. But it's already 1. All right, critical, high impact to the organization, full ransomware, no backup. The DR site is not coming up. Forensics reveals a potential breach. Maybe there's an insider breach. But you want to think these things through. So you're going to, and to kind of take a full cycle, we're going to start off with a risk assessment. We're going to identify where you think your risks are. All right. You're going to educate your people. All right. You're going to build out plans, and you're going to test the plans. And this is going to be your best chance of getting your system kind of back up and running as quickly as possible. And I think, so we've included some resources here for you. Good places to get a little more education about the NIST and the government regulations and some of the things you should be doing, Cyber Awareness Month. And as a wrap up here, Angela, I've got willing to have a conversation with anyone as a follow up here. I've got willing to do a security assessment, and what I mean by that is I can run an external scan, non-intrusive scan of your environment, and give you a scorecard of what your environment looks like to a hacker. I'll run a dark web scan on your environment, and pretty quickly it'll identify users and where they're potentially compromised on past breaches. So it doesn't mean that you're compromised. It just might be they want to go and change passwords. So and I'd be willing to come in and do an internal technical assessment, talk to your IT guys, talk about the controls you have in place, and just kind of bounce some ideas and produce a report for you. So, Andrew, you want anything?
No, look, just it's worth meeting with Dennis, if only to see his fish tank also. But take advantage of these things. And those of you that have questions that touch on any legal obligations when it comes to cybersecurity, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk to any of you.
Anthony, any questions out there?
I'm looking, I don't see anything in the Q&A field right now. Anyone has any questions, please submit it right now in the Q&A field. I do want to thank Dennis and Andrew. I mean, you're right. You could talk about this topic for a weekend, let alone an hour. There's just so much involved, but it is a topic that every company is looking at and is involved in right now. At least if you're not, you should be. Absolutely. I do also want to stress, if anyone wants me to make an introduction to both Dennis or Andrew, if you have some questions you think about after we're done with this webinar and it comes to you that I do have a question, please let me know and I will forward it to either one or both. And we have one question, let me see. Will there be a template provided for incident response planning?
I do have a template. I can certainly send one out. So if you want to provide your email or reach out to me directly, I'll be happy to send one.
Okay. And I don't see any other questions right now. I think our audience is well, there's one more. He said thanks. I think our audience is just absorbing all this information, so which is wonderful information. So if anyone does have any questions you think about at a later time, just please either you can reach out to the panel directly, or you could send me an email and I will get it to both of them. So once again, I want to thank both Dennis and Andrew for your participation today at this webinar. Really a wonderful webinar, lots of information, lots of important information. I also want to thank all the attendees today for signing in and joining us this afternoon. And we look forward to the next segment in 2022 from the Custom Computer Specialists and their technology series. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony and the HIA. Thank you, Dennis, and I want to give a special shout to Marianne and to Custom. You guys are great, and I was happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew. All right. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.